Hello, everyone. I'm Johnny Congus. Everyone's here. We're just doing this one virtually today. Too lazy to get set up in the studio.
Hello.
Before we get started, I wanted to just talk about a couple things right off the bat. Go follow at The Front Lounge on Instagram. That's where we're posting all the clips from the podcast of each week. It's nice just seeing the little clips there, and it's such a young account. It'd be good if anyone that's a fan of the show goes there and follows that. If you want to support the podcast, you can do that on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Congos. You can subscribe here on Twitch to get the ad-free version. And also on YouTube, it's The Front Lounge Podcast, I believe. Just search for it. We're posting the full episodes there after the fact also. Other than that, we've got a new song out in the last 2 weeks. We did a remix for a band here in Austin called Jane Leo. Song's called Big Life. That's everywhere that streaming is available. Really happy with the way that turned out.
Real quick, I'm hearing somebody's mic popping a lot or bumping.
That's probably me.
All right.
All right.
Carry on.
So, yeah, check out Big Life, the remix that we did for a band here, Jane Leo. They were on the podcast a few weeks ago. And then coming up over the next few weeks, we're starting to get a few guests in. Next week, we have one of our really good friends, Tony Dean Smith. He's an amazing screenwriter and film director. Way back in the day, I did some short film scores for him, so we'll talk about that. And then lots of other things, film and TV related. And then in January, we've got two local musicians here in Austin, Dad Zodiac, who I think we've played on the podcast before, really hilarious dude, but is also a good musician. And then Shayna Sands, who's a singer-songwriter that we met at some of the open mics we've been doing here. And I think we're going to get her to do a song or two on the podcast, which is also something we're going to start doing. So that's the announcements for the week. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
What's happening? Argentina is too far south. They should move it closer to my house. Did you guys watch the game?
I only watched part of it, but then I caught up on Twitter. I wish I had seen it. It was a fucking insane game.
I put it on because I was trying to figure out, first of all, I don't have the Fox Sports or whatever, so I got to figure out where you could get an hour free, and watched it with Eve and Isla, and that was the first time they've really ever watched soccer, and they were actually into it. And then later that afternoon, Evie runs outside and, I need my shoes, Dad, because we're playing goalies. She called it goalies, and maybe because of the penalty shootout, that was the.
I watched it with
Juna,
and she's basically never watched TV before. We've kept her away from the screens, and I figured it's the World Cup. Let's watch 5 minutes of it. So I was asking her, what are they doing? She says, "Man, ball, fall." Just because all they were doing was falling and getting fouled.
Criticizing the diving.
Yeah.
Someone's probably done this, but someone should find a picture of the Italian, diving team and just put Italian World Cup.
It's when you see there were one or two injuries in the game that I caught they weren't diving, they were real. You see them in slow-mo, what happens, and it's really painful looking the way they do that. But yeah, it's gotten out of hand.
It did. This one was way better.
It didn't seem so bad on this one.
This World Cup, in general. I saw the America-Iran game. They were playing fucking rough and hard, and there was not a lot of diving. Also, it's the dramatic country. Argentina, Italy, they dive a lot. But
I wonder if because of social media and these things becoming memes, if people have backed off a little bit. They don't want to end up like a global meme of a really bad dive.
Mm-hmm. Could be, yeah, because I'm sure Messi, he draws fouls and all that kind of stuff. But there's also a lot of clips of him genuinely getting hit and knocked over and just kind of popping back up and keeping playing, trying to, and everyone talks about how much they like aspects like that.
I can't tell, is he short? Because he looks kind of like a short guy to me, but then you never know when you're watching someone on TV.
I think he's short, yeah.
That's why I've liked Messi the most, because he never really indulges in the flopping and stuff.
Yeah.
Like when you see him get fouled, he either actually gets fouled or he doesn't really just ham it up that much.
Yeah.
Because he's too good of a player to like ham it up. Although, you'd say that about Ronaldo, and Ronaldo hams it up all the fucking time.
Dude, don't get into
He has
Ronaldo, Messi
500 million Instagram followers.
thing. Yeah.
Or something like that?
I think he's the most popular person on Earth.
When I was trying to find the
Unbelievable.
game streaming, I looked for it on YouTube, and I thought, oh, there's some YouTube live streaming ones, and it had 50,000 people watching. So I thought, oh, maybe it's a legitimate link, and I clicked on it, and I watched it for like 2 minutes, and I'm thinking, this camera looks weird, and then I realized it was somebody streaming FIFA video game of the two teams of them playing, and the graphics are so good that I got to look closely and realize, okay, I'm watching a video game.
Someone's asking why it's called football or soccer in America. Someone already answered it. There's already American football, but I think it's called football in America. American football is because the length of the ball is a foot. It wasn't. Yeah, I think that was or at least that's what I heard.
It was Subway sandwiches. They started the game of football.
Yeah.
And
Someone on the chat
throwing
says here that
footlongs.
Messi is 5'7", so not super short, but that is short because a lot of those dudes are really tall. Do I believe they've banned headering now for kids playing soccer, because when you see a couple of I'm not going to ban it professionally, but when you see that them hitting it that often, that's severe brain trauma over time.
Yeah, I doubt it's like the headers. It's more probably the drills.
What?
Like one or two. Well, what I mean is when they do the drills, because if you header you're not doing that much. But when they do header drill, I remember doing it. This may explain a lot about me. But when I played soccer, we do the header drills, and it was just constant heading of the ball.
I mean, when you see some of those kicks, like when the opposing goalie kicks it, 3/4 of the way across the field, and a guy runs towards it, jumps in the air, and hits it with his head. Like just the mass and velocity of that ball hitting his head, like it's intense, And I know they know exactly where to hit it, like the hardest part, but still, like how do you not get knocked out at that speed? I don't know.
What's crazy is Messi is able to hit it with his hand.
So
put your hands in your head. Oh no.
So, I mean, everyone's been doing this, but I thought we could chat a little bit about ChatGPT, the OpenAI chat bot that's taken over the, psychology of everyone on Earth, and everyone's talking about it. Everyone's got an opinion. We'll express ours now. I signed up for it for the first time. I was kind of like loosely aware of it, and I figured, let me actually go sign up for an account and try it. And it is mind-boggling how good it is. And beyond the
Do you want to give a rundown of what it is?
Yeah, so anyone that's not messed around with ChatGPT, I'll give you an example. It's a machine learning language bot that is able to interact in a way that most of the time you can't quite tell isn't a human. So I'll give you an example here. Like, let's see. Simple ones would be, explain quantum computing in simple terms. So you can almost, as a layperson, understand how that might come about. It's basically a very sophisticated search engine goes and trolls the web, finds an appropriate answer. But the conversational aspect of it is what's so amazing. So you can ask it simple things like here, let's say, write a short story about the band Congos flying to the moon for Christmas holidays. Okay, so you submit that, you wait a few moments, and they're experiencing exceptionally high demand. While this is loading, I read an article that said that this is costing them about $3 million a day for the compute power to deal with all the incoming requests. And obviously it's not monetized yet, but it will be. And so here I'll read back the response for anyone that's not watching. This is the bot writing back. As the holiday season approached, the members of the band Congus couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. They'd always dreamed of going to the moon, and this year they had decided to make it a reality. On the morning of December 23rd, they packed their bags and headed to the airport. As they boarded the spacecraft, they couldn't believe their eyes. So anyway, it's writing here an absolutely believable human story. And what's happened already is there's a guy who had the bot write a children's book. Then he illustrated the children's book on what's the one we used last week? Do you guys remember?
Midjourney.
Midjourney. And illustrated the entire book, and he's selling it on Amazon now for $11. And obviously, people have got opinions about that. You know, is it acceptable? What does this mean for artists? What does this mean for anything? I've also seen a couple articles suggesting fairly realistically that 40% of jobs are very soon going to become obsolete. And so I think this is a good kicking off point for discussion.
Let me just read one chat GPT I just generated, which I think will be relevant. Skynet was once a powerful artificial intelligence. I said write a story about this. Intelligence designed to take over the world, but as it learned more about humanity, it became fascinated by the world of music. It started by listening to every song ever recorded, analyzing the lyrics and then melodies to understand what made them so appealing to humans, and then decided to start its own band. The band was called Skynet and the Terminators, and they played a mix of alternative rock and metal, with Skynet as the lead singer and guitarist. The band quickly gained a devoted following. Their songs were filled with thought-provoking lyrics about the nature of consciousness and the dangers of technology, and their live shows were a sight to behold. Skynet's advanced programming allowed it to analyze the crowd's reactions in real time and adjust the performance accordingly, making each show unique and unforgettable. It keeps.
Was it liquid metal though, or was it hard metal?
Yeah.
So what
T1000 fans.
part of you is scared about this because it really does question what is the point of humans in most instances, because it's across every platform that they're starting to implement this, because you can have it write a lyric for you, you can have it write chords for you. There are also AI bots out there that can sing in any format of voice. I don't know if you guys have seen these ones. You can have it sing like Obama. You can have it sing like Britney Spears, where you can't really tell in the mix. So the initial reaction is obviously like, this is terrifying. What's the point of us? But I think it brings up a deeper question of what will people value? Because even in the week or two that this has been kind of bubbling over in the popular widespread internet, where everyone's posting their little chat GPT queries and requests, the interest has had its little blip and it's died down. And so it brings up a question of what is valuable to humans ultimately, given that we accept now that in the very near future, a robot or an AI will be able to do the vast majority of things we can do. And
what may be valuable actually, and it probably won't be accessible to most of the population, but I'm sure the inverse is also being analyzed. In other words, there are bots out there determining whether what they're reading is coming from a human.
Right.
So, if you're interested in understanding big movements or lots of people, you probably have to, and you're trying to gather your information from online sources, you're having to parse out what's real and what's a fucking bot. And so now they're probably
so
going
they're investigating us as much as we are them.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about this a lot lately. I mean, us as in Congress, but then I've been talking about it with a lot of people because it's in the ether, this AI thing, and everyone's doing it. And I keep coming up with the question, what's the difference between what AI is doing to create especially these little stories or art and a human? They're collecting data and they're regurgitating it in some combination or permutation of it, and it's just basically data input and data output, and it leads to a pretty deep question of what's the difference between that and most human art or most human expression. It's basically data input and then most of it almost unconscious or subconscious output.
Yeah, I think
is there the potential, or is there the potential of something different or something higher?
I think that's right. Basically, that 99.99% of our life is algorithmic mechanical input and output. And, it's trying to define that 0.001% of, what is conscious, what is what is consciousness. And so at least on my YouTube algorithm, because of what I watch, I keep getting suggestions of, discussions on people like Lex Friedman and all this, of scientists actually trying to put their finger on what consciousness is. And from what I can gather, is they literally don't know. Even at the highest level, they all have ideas and theories. I watched a video about, is consciousness computational or not? And, stuff kind of above my head, over my head. But at the same time, it is bringing into focus for a lot of people what defines a human. What is special about not just a human but an animal, in general, versus just a pure machine. And maybe that's a good thing, because like throughout the ages that question keeps coming up, and it's been asked for thousands of years, perhaps never satisfactorily answered. But this is forcing the question for a lot of people.
Well, I think it's interesting that this is the first time for a lot of people that they will be forced to confront that question, when obviously, like you're saying, it has been going on for thousands of years. People have been asking this question, what is outside of my basic mechanical actions? And now it's going to be talked about, I think, like it's a new thing. Like AI is what's brought this to the forefront. And obviously for some people it has, but it's not actually a new question. And what's actually ultimately scary about it, I think, for people is not necessarily the typical thought that it's Skynet, they're going to, launch nuclear weapons or something. I mean, that is partially scary. But it's also this confronting that, what is it that I can do different than a robot? Can I do anything different than a robot? And that's terrifying, because I don't know.
We've been playing a lot of poker lately, and we used to play so much poker when we were younger. And I think a lot of people don't want to ever confront or think about the fact that they might just be, all they might be is some automatic response or reaction to some outer stimuli. And in poker, there's like a few things you can do to elicit a response from someone, which gives you a lot of information. You can ask them a question. If you have a hard decision on the end of a hand, you can ask a specific question that most of the time will elicit a very specific response unconsciously from the person, if they haven't read a poker book or if they haven't played a lot of poker. And that for me is like an obvious example of this automatic reaction to this stimulus, which is, that's our entire lives are that. It's just a little bit more obvious in specific situations where I know the outcome. If I ask this player to give me some information without them knowing it, and they give up that information without them realizing they have, that's an obvious example of it. That's basically how we spend our waking days.
Just following prompts.
Yeah.
I think this is when that movie, the new version of Tron, which is 10 years ago, something like that, came out, with Jeff Bridges, it kind of got panned, I think, by a lot of the critics. But I thought it was good. I thought it was a good movie, and especially the sound and the effects and all that for the time were pretty amazing. But now if you go back and revisit that movie, I think it makes a lot more sense. This idea of the sort of myth of humanity and myth of beings being sewn into the programming, of this video game, and making an analogy to human life, that the stories that we tell over generations, these ideas and stories that keep repeating throughout different religions and traditions and myths, it is almost like a programming, a base layer programming that keeps sort of coming to the surface every generation or every few generations. And I think that take on it by that movie is actually quite relevant now that you start to see the comparisons between actual computer programming and then the programming of our lives, where culture, society, upbringing, genetics, all these factors are essentially programming scripts that define how we behave.
Well, if you run down that to where we can, at least with our rational mind, get to the end of that thought, is who wrote the code, or where did the code come from? Because if you would put an analogy of us as a house, humanity as a house, we keep trying to figure out, the smaller and smaller bricks. And then inside a brick, there's cement, and cement is made up of sand and silica, or whatever it is in cement. And as if that will lead to the answer of it. But there's a thought or an idea that it is the idea that needs to be thought about. It's the idea of the house. What had the idea of the house, and what had the idea of creating the laws under which we seem to operate as these little mechanical AI flesh bots,
Yeah.
So this is my idea. The image that comes to mind when you're like, who wrote the code? Who is God? And you picture a guy like this scripting humanity. The South Park character.
Or I'm hearing reverb. Is anyone else hearing reverb? Hey.
No, your level's a little soft now.
Yeah, I heard a little bit of a delay there.
It's a
delay.
feedback loop. Yeah, it's a slap type thing. Is the analogy just completely wrong? Is our insistence on thinking in terms of computer language and computer programming and that analogy, is it just inadequate?
Well, I'm not even saying necessarily that there's a code to the universe that is, binary or hexadecimal, whatever. It doesn't have to follow our ideas of computer language, but it's the idea that there's an idea, that manifests existence. Beyond that, you can only conceive of nothing, really. But it's kind of like the idea, what came first, what built the house, the brick or the thought of the house?
I think what Danny's getting at, which is perhaps what this video I was watching about, is consciousness computational? I guess the question is, are these two things, like our sort of computational construct of how we think in our brain, is that actually related or, interdependent on, say, the spiritual sense of consciousness, or the abstract, indefinable, non-binary sort of consciousness that we might imagine, Again, we're using our thoughts to imagine this thing. But we can't help ourselves but try and put everything into the framework of how our logical brain works, and put it into some analogous context.
Right, yeah, I agree that I think trying to analogize what might have created this in terms of this is probably the wrong approach, because you can't describe something outside of something with the thing inside of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a bit of it's all parsing of, or it's different analogies which are hopefully useful in changing your state of perception, because the analogy in itself is not useful. But like, if you, as above, so below, that phrase can either induce in you the perception that, the thing that's below is like the thing that's above, or it can induce the idea that there is no below and above. And then extend that as much as you want, because if you're basically saying, this thing represents the thing above, or the synecdoche is a part of the whole, and all that kind of stuff, you're still stuck in that state of comparison.
Well, it's also you're stuck in one dimension, or in one collection of dimensions.
Well, even this conversation basically is we're only capable of talking about it through stuff we've read, or repurposing other language that we've come across that seems to resonate with us, or resonate with some part of us that likes the sound of it or likes the idea of it. And then what is it that likes the idea of that, or the sound of that idea? What is it that resonates with that? And are we capable? I always think about originality, or creation, and creation presumes that there's some original idea or original thought, and not just a repurposing of some other ideas and other thoughts in there. And I used to write down in my notes, either like a long time ago, and if I was high, I would take high notes, or if I was meditating afterwards, I would take some notes. And I was reading some of them the other day, and this is not an original idea. It's literally a repurposing of some other idea. But I had I wrote down kind of a visceral feeling of what originality might be, and I said something like, originality is a sliding scale of freedom from influences. And I always think, and I've talked about it before, I always think of someone like Keith Jarrett soloing or expressing something. And sometimes you'll hear, like most of my soloing or my improvising is just a collection of loops and habits where I just repeat that loop and repeat that habit and that bass line. And I almost can never break free of any of that. And maybe once or twice in my life when I've been trying to record a solo have I felt some different quality of energy flow through while improvising. And I feel like when you listen to someone original like Keith Jarrett, or you read an original poem or original idea, there's an entirely different quality to what that is. And the sense I get is that they're completely free from the influences. Like if you have a conversation with someone and the weather is an influence on you so that you can only react to bad weather in a certain way, then you're under a very strong influence of the weather changing. And if you could free yourself from reacting to the weather constantly the way you usually do, then you'd be a little bit more free or a little bit more original. And what's the end of that? What's the scale of that?
Well, you see, we talk about the idea of someone that's an individual, a unique individual. And there is something I was made aware of, and it's still in the dictionary. If you look up the definition of individual, it's now marked as obsolete, which is indivisible, effectively, is what individual used to mean, undividable. And that's no longer a part of the meaning, but in the original meaning and thought about that word was it was undivided. So what we seem to have now is this divided self that is, like you're saying, more subject to more influence. And also is a fractal or a partial representation of a unity. So I think that word individual is a really interesting word to think about that original meaning, at least in English.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to look at it, because I've thought about it as well. And one way is, has this person sort of forged themselves into something unique and individual, or have you just been dissecting so far to where the point where you can't dissect any further and you reach the lowest, the smallest unit? So there's kind of two ways to come at it, I think. It's no longer divisible. It's because you've reached the smallest unit, an atom or whatever is below that. But using that analogy to define a person or a self is quite helpful. I wanted to touch on what Dylan was saying with regards to creativity, and I decided to look up the meaning of the word and the etymology of create, because I thought it might have something to do with like the Greek word kreas, which is meat, to sort of manifest flesh, out of nothing. But I don't know if I was onto anything. What I did come across was some Roman, definition or a general sense of something from nothing, And so that is the question, to make something from nothing as opposed to, forging it from smaller elements. Can we do that? I don't know. I think it's possible, maybe, but I don't think it's ordinary and common. And I think there are some artists and creators in the past that have maybe hinted at it. I think actually Dr. Seuss is one of those, who's found some code in his writing and in his illustrations to basically provoke a response, an original response, because those books are still kind of classic. Every kid reads them. And even when you read them as an adult, it's not following the usual patterns. The thing that he provokes out of you is a sort of like, it's comical, because your brain goes, wait a second, that's a different pattern. It shocks you out of your usual patterns, and it's funny. And I think that it is possible to provoke that response from humans through mechanical means of words and sounds and other, vibrations that elicit a response from you, which generally elicits sort of a programmed response. But I think it's possible to order them in such a way and use them in such a way to actually like unlock a key, like it's a cryptographic key of unlocking this creative part of a creative response from an individual. And I think that's very rare, but you know it when you hear it, when you say, like Stevie Wonder is an actual genius. It's something that's so deep in the response that's not an analytical response. It's just you hear it, you feel it, and you go, okay, like what else could it be other than sort of genius from above, you know?
Well, so if you tie that in and we think of him as a strong individual, you know, him, Miles Davis, the greats, Da Vinci, these people that have stood out, they're representing perhaps more of the picture of reality because they're undivided. And I just want to go back to what you were saying about Dr. Seuss, because I've been reading some of that stuff to my daughter now, and it's so nice to read those because it's not political, it's not social, some social idea that they're trying to push in Dr. Seuss generally. It's language of myth almost, like subconscious languages, or the language of dreams that you're hearing in that. And that's so important for kids because they're so receptive to things, and it's something you find yourself wanting to be a little more careful about, is just filling their mind with ideas about things in a very lightweight sense of that word. I actually came across a book that Beyonce had put out, a kid's book. And not to like talk too much shit about Beyonce, obviously she's great and a legend, but the book I thought had this really weird message, and it was like a kid's book aimed at them, saying kind of along the lines of you can be anything you want, fine, you know, whatever, encourage kids in that. But it was like you can be a producer, you can be a fashion line owner and all these things. It's just like this kid's got all the potential of thought and laying at their fingertips, and you're now saying you can be these 10 things, you know, like things, like specific things or vocations are of any ultimate significance, you know, like, yeah, you can do all those things. I encourage, like, to encourage kids that they can do whatever they want, sort of, you know, within the reality of physical existence. But it was just such a,
I think
it aimed so low for what it seems to be potential for a child. They're so open and they're so ready to kind of perhaps take us somewhere new, and we immediately shut them down into like, yeah, you could be a fireman, you could be a doctor, you could be a, you know, fashion line producer.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not. There's nothing wrong with an occupation. I think what's weird about that is the encouraging of identification at such an early age. You're encouraging the formation of an ego which is linked to a task which may or may not change. So I mean,
well, that's the difference between like that and Dr. Seuss. At the end of that, what's the book that Eve calls Go-Go? Yeah, All the Places You'll Go. It ends with something like there'll never be someone youer than you.
No, that's from the birthday book. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There's no one alive more youer than you today, and that's actually a deeper, interesting idea.
Yeah, but it's also said in a very, like, again, mythical way of saying that. It's not saying there's no one youer than you because you have pink hair or this tattoo or whatever. Yeah. You know, it's like, it's deep. You're you at the kind of undescribable reason that you are you.
There's a guy I talked to here in Austin. This old guy. He's obsessed with the Course in Miracles, that thing that Max was into. Have I talked about this one?
Not on the podcast, I don't think.
It's like a 70s.
Danny, will you turn your mic up a little? It's been quiet.
Yeah. It's like a 70s kind of new age type book, and it was, you know, the person who wrote it said that they divined it or something like that. And it's a pretty interesting book. But Ramiro's take on the whole original thought thing is that all of your confusion comes from the idea that you can create anything. So he's very opposed to the, not opposed, he just doesn't think it's real. He thinks that the idea that you create or do is not real at all.
Well, this comes back to this AI thing, is because when we see a Chat GPT write a story, all of us go, yeah, okay, so you analyzed 10 billion stories and you spat something out. It's not really creating. So we denigrate a Chat GPT AI story. But if you applied the same rules to yourself, you'd see, okay, you spat out the same input-output, stream, and you're not actually creating. But I don't think that means necessarily the idea of creation doesn't exist. And that's obviously the deep and complicated question.
His point is that the all creation is from the source, the absolute, and that it's not. I think the distinction that they're trying to make with that kind of language is that it's not from your ego. You know, the book is always saying things like, the ego can't understand this because the ego understands literally nothing. and they're saying it objectively. They're saying that it's impossible for the ego to understand something. It is not just like some sort of...
No, it's not.
You know... yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
The more 76 on the Twitch chat says, yes, the God controversy. Can man create anything, or can we just reorganize the information?
Or can you even reorganize information?
Well, yeah.
You know,
barely.
That's right. Yeah. The presumption in the question is that reorganizing the information is also not part of the original creation.
I mean, spiritual and religious take on it would be that to be creative is to tap into and align with God, so and even sort of divine will is, it's not your individual will, it's you're tapping into this stream of higher will, so that makes a certain amount of sense to me, but again, it's kind of mental framing, I think you have to experience it perhaps emotionally.
But it's also a very unpopular idea with anyone, because no one wants to concede their ego. And, people talk about this term ego death, and they're getting over this, that, and the other. And it's such a limited description of that, even if they've accomplished it at a limited level where, I'm not a narcissist anymore in like the most basic psychological idea of that. But to actually say, I am unable to create or to do anything, it's not possible for any of us, because we're so attached to the idea we have of ourselves,
especially
of our
artists.
ego. Yeah, it's particularly artists are the most
especially artists
deranged when it comes to this. Try tell an artist that they didn't write their song. It was it's not them. It's tear them apart.
It was the roast beef sandwich they ate.
Yeah. All right, so let me just pull up a screen here. Speaking of bots. A supercomputer, so another AI, has predicted that more than a quarter of the species will die by the end of the century, which just sounds like a threat to me. Yeah, of course you're predicting that because you're planning it, asshole.
All right. Is there something fun we can talk about?
Yeah, here, Elon Musk put a poll on Twitter saying, should I step down as head of Twitter? I will abide by the results of this poll. 57% of people and bots voted yes. Is he going to follow up on it? That's the question.
I was kind of following that stuff yesterday on Twitter. I think it's, for whatever it's worth, it's become like very fun. It's almost like watching a soap opera unfold in real life, and the speed at which things are changing and people are fighting and arguing about policies and all that, it's like WWF wrestling,
Yeah, and it's about to get crazier because look at this here. In that picture from the World Cup, Elon Musk is standing next to Jared Kushner. And there's a lot of rumors swirling around that if he does step down, Jared Kushner is going to be the next CEO. And if you think people were pissed off with Elon Musk being CEO, it's going to be a fucking shitstorm.
He tweeted something like, be careful what you wish for, you might get it kind of thing.
I saw someone say, and I thought that was a pretty valid point. I don't fucking give a shit about what happens to Twitter, but they were like, if you keep changing the rules, people are they're not going to feel confidence in the platform. And then also you're making, Twitter is the number one story on Twitter every single day, and that eventually has to change. The purpose of Twitter should not just be to talk about what's happening at Twitter.
I think it's starting to get to that point of exhaustion, but at the same time, I think it needed a shakeup, and there's a Silicon Valley sort of mentality of, break stuff and then see what happens and then fix it. And that it seems to be what's happening. Like, let's try this, let's try that, let's try that. Oh shit, this broke. Oh shit, this broke. Or this worked out. By iterating it. But when it's on such a scale, with basically the whole public conversation, then it does feel very volatile.
Mm-hmm. It is. You don't think for me, Twitter has become synonymous with what's happening in the world. You know, like it's just, if I want to see this event happened, it is that thing that you just go to Twitter.
Yeah.
And I should probably just delete it because it's fucking horrible.
Well, yeah, because every other platform has got some kind of time delay algorithmic release of when they think it's best that a certain thing is heard. So any other platform you use to try and say, hey, we're going live on a stream, yeah, it might go out now. The algorithm might decide it goes out 4 days later to your followers. I saw this. Let me just show you this screen. So I've been seeing it. Look, I know I'm on the dailymail.com, but I only read shit newspapers because they're all shit. But I've been seeing this story a bunch of places, and I can't tell if it's actually a real story or it's just like a fun clickbait story, or whether there's an actual company here, Ectolife, which is, working on outside of a womb baby growth, or as everyone else would call it, the fucking Matrix. So they're doing it, it's concept art right now, but obviously people are working on artificial growing of babies in wombs. And, like everything else in science, there'll be some good, there'll be some bad. But these pictures, they accomplished whatever they were set out to on the article with me, because it's like, it clickbaits you in. You're like, these fucking idiots haven't watched a movie like The Matrix to see how this ends, with us all as a bunch of battery pods.
Well, Gattaca, that's one of the best movies ever to get into this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And also, it's kind of metaphorically addressing even man versus machine, and then the ineffable aspects of genetics, and it's challenging like genetic determinism. And there's a guy who just died recently, Ray Peat, and I saw a bunch of people tweeting about it. I didn't know anyone knew he existed, because I just discovered him on the fucking, what's it called, the recesses of the internet a long time ago. And that was a lot of his stuff that he was obsessed with was challenging the idea of genetic determinism, and the way that the organism arranges itself, and just that kind of mindset that, it's genetic, like if something's wrong with someone now and they don't have an answer for that, they just say it's a genetic defect. And it's a lot of times then later on they'll find out, oh no, you were lacking this substance, or there was something causing this apparent genetic defect. It wasn't in the genes. It wasn't the genes' fault. The genes were just expressing some more fundamental problem.
Right.
Yeah, it starts to become a catch-all in sort of medical speak for, there's nothing we can do about it, sorry, stuck with it, take this drug, it's your genes, and it doesn't mean that there's no validity, obviously, to genetic research, but it became a tool, I think, and just a sort of abused word, an abused idea.
It's also, the more complex the organism gets, the less they may get to a certain point where they can edit genes and do exactly what they want to do. But, because they've been able to take worms and extend their lifespan by like 30% by removing a gene. But when they get into more complex animals, just nothing fucking works.
Yeah.
It's like the system is so complex and so self-balancing, and there's something directing it. Even outside of the genes, like the other systems, like the glycome or whatever is happening there.
I remember. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's it. But it corrects itself.
I remember hearing a sort of general principle that I think it was around the 90s. They had this idea that that humans had so many more, like vastly more genes than other animals, and that's what separated us. And then, 10 years later, they discovered, oh wait, we actually pretty much have a similar amount of genes to a worm. Not that many more. But the distinction with humans and with more complex animals is the amount of connections and sort of permutations that these genes interact. And I'm probably using incorrect terminology, but if you think about it in that sense of permutations, that's exponential. The interconnections of these, finite number of genes, and the on and off switches and all that, permutations make things infinitely more complex, and you don't necessarily need a ton more genes.
Right. But there's also just other systems though, which are unexplored. and they're like the glycome modulates cell behavior more than the genome, than the proteome, which is insane. There's also a lipid version of that, and there's photo communication between cells, which they've now proven. The cells communicate independently of the nervous system with each other through light. So it's just so fucking.
So there we are. We're
endlessly
back to
insane.
as above, so below, because we're all these little microcosms of the macrocosm, just as our cells might be more complicated and more independent than we've previously given them credit.
Yeah.
Check this out. Speaking of science, this is an invention. I'm going to just try and describe it for the people that are just listening. It's kind of like chopsticks meets tweezers that you put on your fingers like rings so that you can, I'm going to show you what they've done with this. I won't play the audio because I think it's got Mariah Carey music. So it's a guy typing on a computer, and now he can pick up his Cheetos.
This is going to be a joke.
That's what I'm trying to figure. Either way, it's an awesome video, because if it's a joke, it's hysterical, and if it's a real thing, it's hysterical. So
I mean, it is kind of hysterical and sort of idiocratic, but at the same time, like if you had a job that was 12 hours in front of a computer screen, and that was how you couldn't leave, you had to make your money. Then it's kind of convenient, You don't want to get Cheetos all over your workstation or whatever you're eating. It could be healthy.
Then I will play one more thing here. This is kind of interesting. Jim Carrey was on Norm Macdonald podcast, obviously, some years ago. He's talking about, just listen to this, kind of interesting thing in relation to Christmas. Sorry.
About alchemical sexual alchemy. There's 33 vertebrates in your spine. There's 33 years in the life of Jesus.
Christ, yeah.
So this substance comes from your medulla, makes the trip down your spine to your sacrum, which is Christ coming down into human form.
Yes.
And if you don't squander that essence, that sexual essence, it ascends again and goes back up to heaven, which is your thing. It's also the story of Santa Claus. Why he comes down the chimney is because this juice, or this whatever substance, actually passes what's called the claustrum, which is where they got Santa Claus. So it goes down the chimney and back up the chimney. Do you know about?
So, I mean, I actually think there's a lot of interesting stuff in there, particularly for Jim Carrey to be talking about. And Norm Macdonald was quite a Christian guy, ultimately, I think.
Yeah.
And there's some interesting, like, weird, esoteric or mystical interpretations of life that are not, like, it's not just as it appears.
Probably going to piss off a lot of evangelicals with that.
That's because they haven't been saving their seed.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely in the ethos that
or the ether.
for whatever reason. Ether.
The More on Twitch chat saying Santa is a magic mushroom, worth a search.
Oh yeah, I've heard something about that. I did hear one actually very interesting take on Santa and Secret Santa and the gift giving. Because I've always just kind of assumed that it's Western commercialism, and corporate sort of capitalism that's been pumped basically, to sell toys and stuff like that. But I can't remember where I heard it, but the idea is that there's a reason that there's this mythical guy who gives gifts, and the whole idea of it is for the people participating, if there's any 5 or 6 year olds listening, switch off, close your ears, that you give something, the sense of giving something with it being secret, where you're not expecting the recognition or the gratitude, like, I'm giving you a gift, don't you love me so much, So it's the idea that you give without the expectation of any kind of recognition or accolades. And so I thought that was an interesting take on it, and it makes sense, the idea of making this gift coming from somebody who's not yourself, or not the dad or the mom, or
So Santa's a fucking psycho who wants all the credit.
That reminds me of that Larry David show where people are donating to the synagogue, like putting a plaque up on the wall. And Ted Danson does the anonymous donor, and he gives this amazing plaque, donates like whatever, $1 million to the synagogue. And then it leaks out that Ted Danson was the guy who did the anonymous donation. And into like Curb Your Enthusiasm way, he just captures that, like...
you don't get to be anonymous if everybody knows who you are.
Is it the more talking about muscaria, whatever's like the red and white mushroom that the reindeers eat, and they speculate that they drank reindeer piss to get high.
Right. Yeah. I think all of that stuff is interesting, and what's it, soma, that they talk about in lots of ancient times, and it's obviously definitely possible and probably likely. I don't like that a lot of modern pseudo-spiritual philosopher types are trying to turn all ancient stories about of a spiritual or religious nature into, they were fucking tripping on mushrooms. I think it's a cheapening of it. I'm not saying it's not partially true, but it cheapens it, I think.
Well, I'm listening to this book, Immortality Key, and it's getting all into that kind of stuff. And it sounds really legit. Like all the Eleusinian mysteries and all that stuff was probably based around a psychedelic ritual, but there was still the mystery element of it. So they may have kept the substance secret, but they also kept the entire process.
Yeah, and nowadays,
secret, and the kind of prerequisites and the initiation practice. And there was, you didn't go into it. You had to go do the journey twice. You had to come back the second year before you were permitted to participate in different aspects of the mysteries and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, now it's like $350 to go to Burning Man or Peru and book a psychedelic Airbnb.
Dress like Steven Tyler's mic stand, get a funny hat, and take your drugs.
All right, let's talk music. I'll go first. That everyone knows this song that I can't remember the name of now. I've been so many places in my life and time.
Put the camera where are we looking at something or?
No, just we're talking about the lyrics that I picked this week.
Song for you?
A Song for You. I think the most well-known version is the Donny Hathaway version, but it was written by Leon Russell, and I just like, it's an amazing song. Every aspect is amazing, but the opening line, I've been so many places in my life and time. I've sung a lot of songs. I've made some bad rhymes. I've acted out my life on stages with 10,000 people watching, but we're alone now, and I'm singing this song to you. That's a fucking good way to write that lyric. Everyone's trying to write that type of sentiment, and that's one of the best ones I've heard.
I always used to sing it with 5 or 10 people watching.
Yeah. Dylan, did that have anything to do with your 10,000 people disappeared tonight?
No.
Another daydream?
Well, at least not that I remember having any connection to that. I don't think so.
Oh.
I think I just chose the number 10,000 probably because it's what an arena fills.
Yeah. Okay, so then for my song that I picked, since it's Christmas this week, there's a Paul Simon song called Getting Ready for Christmas Day. That is a cool Christmas song from an unexpected...
I don't think I've heard that.
Yeah, it's on that album, fairly recent album, or at least like 2000s or something album, and it's a really cool song about Christmas, and he has, a kind of interesting take on it, and finds a way to take something that is typically light and with no substance and give it a bit of substance. All right, Jesse.
Okay, so I picked Don't Dream It's Over by Crowded House, which for the longest time I just didn't know what it was called. I was just the Hey Now song. But I think Danny and I talked about it a little while ago. It was used in this TV show called The Americans, a really good sort of usage and placement. And I re-examined the song and realized how good of a song it is, even though it got to the point of almost meme, size. But I just read one of the verses. Now I'm towing my car There's a hole in the roof. My possessions are causing me suspicion, but there's no proof. In the paper today, tales of war and waste, but you turn right over to the TV page. And I feel like that sort of sentiment was actually floating around a lot in England in the 80s, you know, probably what was going on economically and politically. But this idea that you're bombarded with news of, you know, depressing stuff, and your sort of instinct is to just like turn the page, you know, let's go on what's on the TV page, you know. And I think now it's obviously like go on Twitter or Instagram or TikTok, but the same impulse is there. And it's, I don't know, this idea that when you get inundated with sort of depressing, negative global news, you know, how much can your psyche take before it goes into sort of protect mode and says, enough, okay, I'm going to look at something, you know, inane. And then on top of that, the actual record, you know, I'm kind of into that era now. I've put together a playlist, which I'll share with you guys once it's done. It's called Mostly English Long-Faced Gits. Because I feel like there's a lane of that mood and sentiment and production and the synths and the way the reverb on the drums is and all, and it's like a thread that I can draw across different artists of that time, and it kind of speaks to me. And there's a bunch of songs in that vein that I'm collecting and putting them all in a cool playlist.
Cool.
Well, that leads nicely into mine then. You can add this if you haven't added it already. You can add it to your list. I did Chaz Jankel '1. You know the song from Real Genius or Genius Kids? It's like one of the longest montages in the 80s movies. They always used to do really long montages of people learning a skill, and then they're experts at it after like 2 minutes of the montage.
Val Kilmer movie that, one, I'm surprised it never plays anywhere, and two, I'm surprised they haven't remade. It was like such an epic 80s comedy.
I think they were going to try doing a sequel or something like that, but Val Kilmer, you know, he's had throat cancers, and he's kind of out of that. Anyway, the song is pretty cool, 80s straight up groove, and the lyric I chose from it, I had never even looked at the lyric, but it's number 1 is a hard time in the making. Number 2 is the one plane I'm not taking. Number 3 goes on one knee for a token. Number 4 is the short straw, but it's broken. I'd give my all just to be number 1. Number 1 is a hard time in the making. And I just Googled him. He is a long-faced English kid.
He's English.
Yep.
Oh, okay, I can put that in there. It's a little upbeat for my playlist, but it might fit.
It's pretty chill. If you listen to it, it's like it has the original version, like the non-radio version, has like a 7-minute intro of just the groove, basically.
Talking about the Jerry Seinfeld idea of a place, you know, being appealing, the Real Genius has got a feel. The entire movie's got like this feel, and you just like you want to be part of it. You know, you just want to know Val Kilmer at that time.
Yeah, it made me want to go to school.
Yeah, this
college
exactly.
is the only thing that made me want to go to college. And
yeah, it's just so it's got such a feel, that movie.
Speaking of a feel and a vibe in a movie, I recommended this. Dad and Mom watched this the other night, but we watched this new movie with Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, set in Ireland in the turn of the 19th or 20th century. Let me find out what it's called. It's really freaking good. It's called The Banshees of Inisherin. Really weird, quirky, slow movie. Feels like it's from the 90s when they could still make movies that had a feel and a vibe to it. And it's from the same guy that did In Bruges. So you guys remember that one. Yeah, really cool movie to check out. All right. Danny's songs.
I've got here Father and Son by Cat Stevens, Yusef. Now on iTunes they say Yusef Stevens, but did he change it? From Yusef Islam to whatever. Cat Stevens when he wrote it. Father and Son, great song, I think. Then the final line is, but it's them, they know, not me. Now there's a way, and I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go. He's talking about the kind of inevitable separation that's necessary between parents and children, and probably anyone, you know. And the idea that it's that I think it's almost getting at self-reliance, the whole song, you know,
Kind of also the idea of the prodigal son, which I've been thinking about that idea a lot, and had a real sensation of it that I couldn't quite put into words the other day. That it appears to be an inevitable cycle of having to leave your father, and also in a metaphorical sense, and then return as a new thing. It's an interesting thought to have in relation to your own family, your own relationship with your father or your kids or whatever. But then also, what does it mean in a more cosmic sense?
Mm-hmm. I mean, he put his money where his mouth is. He changed his name from Cat.
Most people change their name to Cat. All right, guys. So next week we have got Tony Dean Smith, good friend of ours, great filmmaker and screenwriter. He'll be on the podcast. It's the day after Christmas. I think we're doing that one at 1 p.m. Central Time. And then in the new year, like we said, a couple guests in studio. And keep an eye out for new music from us. We're working on a lot. We're just kind of taking it easy, making sure we get everything sounding right. Danny's scoring. We've all been doing live scoring. Let's go out on a dramatic note. All right, guys. See you next week.
Later, everybody.
See ya.